Good morning and welcome North City Church to our online worship gathering. Thanks so much for joining us. If you are new with us, please reach out. We'd love to get to know you a little bit. You can let us know who you are in the chat stream or contact hello@northcitychurchmpls.com. We want to stay connected with you in this time, and we want to make sure that you are connected with us. How our online worship gathering goes is we engage in some musical worship together. There's going to be a sermon, some things for the kids, and some highlight videos of people in our community as well. So we know that online worship gatherings are different, and they require some putting aside of the distractions and trying to focus in. So we encourage you to do that. We also encourage you to grab some communion elements because we partake in that together as a community. And so grab cracker or bread or juice. Some of you may have received that this last week. So take a moment, take a breath, and we welcome God into this space as Kara leads us in some musical worship now.
Good morning and welcome to North City Church. We're so glad that you're here. We're just going to get started this morning with a few worship songs. This first song is This Is Amazing Grace.
Who breaks the power of sin and darkness, whose love is mighty and so much stronger, the King of glory, the King above all kings, who shakes the whole earth with holy thunder and leaves us breathless in awe and wonder, the King of glory, the King above all kings. This is amazing grace. This is unfailing love, that you would take my place, that you would bear my cross, you lay down your life, that I would be set free. Oh, Jesus, I sing for all that you've done for me. Who brings our chaos back into order, who makes the orphan a son and daughter, the King of glory, the King above all kings, who rules the nations with truth and justice, shines like the sun in all of its brilliance, the King of glory, the King above all kings. This is amazing grace. This is unfailing love, that you would take my place, that you would bear my cross, you lay down your life, that I would be set free. Oh, Jesus, I sing for all that you've done for me. Singing, worthy is the Lamb who was slain, worthy is the King who conquered the grave, worthy is the Lamb who was slain, worthy is the King who conquered the grave. Come on, worthy is the Lamb who was slain, turn into revival. Lord, lead us back to you. So come, move, let justice flow on like a river. Let worship turn into revival. Lord, lead us back to you. King of all generations, let every tongue and nation surrender all to you alone. King of all generations, let every tongue and nation surrender all to you alone. So come, move, let justice roll on like a river. Let worship turn into revival. Lord, lead us back to you. So come, move, let justice roll on like a river. Let worship turn into revival. Lord, lead us back to
North City, hope you guys are doing good. We're happy to be here with you. For preschoolers, we have a memory verse for you. It is Romans 8:39, and it goes, "Nothing at all can ever separate us from God's love."
And for elementary students, your verse is from Galatians 6:9. Let us not become tired of doing good. At the right time, we'll gather a crop if we don't give up. Have a great week,
Have a great week.
everyone.
Thanks so much, Chad and Anna. We're so grateful that we can include our Family Life team members to remind us of the various verses that we're trying to put in front of our kids and remind them of those truths that God is giving us. A couple announcements we just want to make sure you're aware of. Adobe Nduka has been serving in a Family Life and operations staff role capacity for the past year, and we're just so grateful for her contribution to North City Church. She is going to remain a part of our community, but this is one of her official last Sundays. And so her staff role, although it is concluding, her community role is continuing, and we're really grateful that we've just had her in the capacity we have had. And so we just want to bless her. And so if you haven't reached out to her already, please do, and thank her for all the ways that she has served our community. Secondly, we want to give you an update that nope, baby has not come yet, but could come at any point. And so we've been preparing for our leave together. And Brooke Summers, who JD is going to introduce to you, is our parental leave coordinator. And she's going to share more with JD about what that looks like and a few more details of our paternity and maternity leave.
Well, hello, North City community. I have with me here on this Zoom call, Brooke Summers. Brooke, you want to say hi?
Hello, North City. Good to be seen. Since I can't see you, it's good to be seen by you.
These are odd times. We're spending way too much time on Zoom, but this is a great way to introduce you to someone who you may see more in the next month here. So the reason I'm introducing you to Brooke is Brooke has been a resident, someone who's been involved in the Mill City, North City Church Network community. And she's someone who said yes to helping out North City in this time when Christian Ann and I are about to go on parental leave. So we are excited that Brooke said yes to being the parental leave coordinator, we're calling it. So she's someone who's highly responsible, highly capable, knows North City, even though maybe this is the first time seeing her face. She's been around our community, knows many of you, and is a really consistent presence. So we're excited because Brooke is going to help and coordinating all the things while Pastor Christian Ann and I welcome our little one here. Who knows when, but probably early June. So we wanted you to see her face. Yeah, we're all super excited, and trust me, you will know when it happens. We're all super excited for you to get to know Brooke a little bit more. And Brooke is basically just here to make sure everything goes along, and you know who you can talk to if you need to ask about something. So if you've got a question about North City, please ask it. Brooke has a North City email now, brooke@northcitychurchmpls.com. You can find that information on the website. Brooke won't be doing everything, but she knows who will be doing all the things. I love that head shake. No way I'm doing everything, but she can help you with questions you might have, or if something happens and you want to bring the church community in on it, she's your first call. So Brooke, is there anything that you would want to say to the North City community as you come on for this temporary role to help us through this time?
Yeah. One, I'm excited to serve you guys, and I feel honored I feel honored by the trust you guys are giving me just to serve you and to help God continue the good work that He's doing in North City Church. So I think for me, what I'm most excited about is getting to know you as a church a little bit better, and then some of you individually who are stepping up into some roles, maybe they're roles you've had before or some new roles. I'm really excited to help facilitate and resource you as you use your gifts to bless your neighbors in the name of Jesus. So yeah, I won't be doing everything because you don't need me to. I'm just here to make sure that if you need something or something needs to get communicated, that I can be a resource and a guide in the process.
Awesome. Thank you, Brooke. Yeah, so baby is not here yet as we're recording this. You will have heard if you're watching this on Sunday if baby has come, but baby is due June 6th. But just so you all know the timeline a little bit, and Christian Ann and I will share about this next week in more detail. Starting in June is when Brooke's plan is to step into this role, and she'll be with us through June. And hopefully by that time, depending on the timing of baby coming, I will be able to step back in some capacity. So just so you know the time frame, if baby comes earlier, Brooke's ready to step up and be there for us. But Brooke, thank you for being with us in this way. We're excited for you to get to know the North City community a little bit. Thanks.
Same with me.
Thanks, Brooke and JD. We are now moving into our offering time at North City, so we are so thankful for the ways that this community has been giving over the past few months and continually. You show yourself, North City, to be such a generous church. On the third Sunday, we always do a generosity team update, budget update, just to keep everybody in the loop. So here's a memo from them.
Hey, North City Church, welcome. For this month's generosity team update, we have a really special guest. You guys might know this guy is Pastor JD Larson from Ashland, Wisconsin. This month, we thought it would be a great opportunity to check in with Pastor JD on a few of the core values that the generosity team has had in place since the beginning days of North City Church. And two in particular we want to highlight: transparency and celebration. The other core value is participation, but we really felt it'd be really great to kind of touch base on where we're at with transparency and celebration. So as part of this update, we really thought it'd be awesome for JD to share a little bit about what's going on and share a little bit about what North City Church has got going on with transparency.
Sweet. Thanks, Dave. Happy to do it. Yeah. Transparency is one of our values, and so we want to always be bringing you, North City community, relevant information about how North City is doing financially. And one of the things I thought about as Dave asked me this question was we brought to you earlier in the winter that some of our goals for where we're at as a church are to become cash flow positive. That's the first one. The second one is we want to get to a place where we've got enough savings in the bank to have our own savings account, because right now that's run through our partner denomination. The other one is ultimately, in a 3-year journey we're on, we want to become financially self-sufficient. So on that first one, we celebrated with you all that we became cash flow positive based on the local giving that you all are giving generously. And I think that's a piece of transparency that we had some really strong months before COVID hit. And many of you might be wondering, like, hey, how is this affecting our finances? Dave, the generosity team, we're working together to pay attention to that. But we wanted you all to know, by the way, or in terms of transparency, that we're still shooting for that. We're still maintaining that goal, in part because of the generosity that you keep practicing as a part of North City, and because we're paying attention to the expenses and the income, and we'll keep you up to date on that as well. I also just wanted to throw in a celebration, because all generosity is not just financial. That a couple weeks ago, Christian Ann put this ask out from Loring to adopt a garden, and that sign-up sheet was basically empty with a few exceptions, and the North City community basically filled that whole thing up. So we talk about how generosity is not just monetary, it's how we're being generous with our time, and North City really stepped up in huge ways and said, hey, I will partner with Loring in that way. So that's super exciting. And I guess that's a form of participation. So I went above and beyond and hit on all of our values for you. So that's a quick generosity update from me.
That's awesome, JD. Thanks so much. And just a reminder, everybody, if you have any questions, concerns, or things you'd like to discuss, please reach out to the generosity team, where it can be reached at generosity@northcitychurchmpls.com. Thanks, everybody.
All right, we're moving into community time, which we take a few minutes to turn to the person next to you or the chat stream. And we would love for you to answer this question, just to get a little conversation going. Would you consider yourself a green thumb? Are you a gardener? Do you want to become a green thumb? With spring around the corner and here, we are just excited about the green, right? But are you a green thumb? Go to the chat stream, turn to the person next to you. We'll bring you back in about 2 minutes.
What's up, everybody? Hope you got in a great conversation over chat. My name's JD. I'm one of the pastors here. If we haven't met yet, I would love to connect with you. If you want to say hello in the chat or direct message me, if you're on Facebook, I'll be there in both of those platforms. Thank you for joining us today in this sort of unique way that we've been experiencing church. One of the great benefits about it is we do get to chat with each other. So let's keep that conversation going over chat. I love to do that. And if the conversation doesn't make sense there, we can take it elsewhere as well and continue the conversation after this morning. I'm so grateful to be with you all. We're going to continue our series in Romans. We've been reading through this letter that Paul wrote to the Roman church together. And Christian Ann so beautifully started that conversation for us last week talking about Romans 12. I really encourage you to go and listen to that if you haven't yet. We intentionally chose to start there because we sort of thought if there's a heart of this book, that's sort of it. What Paul's trying to communicate to the people there is not just in that chapter, but that's sort of the culmination of the arguments that he lays out for the church and for us today. So today's going to maybe look a little bit different, maybe look a little bit more like a Bible study where we just kind of go through some texts. Honestly, these 3 chapters sort of wreck my brain a little bit. Not because they're wrong or anything like that. These are just some full words of Paul. There's a lot going on here, and just frankly more than I can communicate this morning. So what I hope to do is just look at a few of these verses with you and try to bring out stuff that may be important to us in our everyday life, may be important to us as we're trying to navigate the world around us. So I want to jump right in, if you're game, to chapter 1, and I want to go to verse 16 and read that. Before we get to that, you should understand a little bit about this book that we're about to jump into. As I said, this is Romans. This is a letter. A lot of the New Testament is letters from people to people. So you got to know who this is to and who it's from and what the occasion is. So who it's to is the group of churches in Rome. And more specifically, these group of churches are a mix of Gentiles and Jews, as you'll see it says in the text. And there's a lot of tension going on between these two groups because it's still very early in Christianity. And they just among themselves are trying to figure out what Christ means, what Jesus, what his story, what his way of being that he taught his disciples, what believing in Jesus looks like in everyday life. And honestly, they're getting into some arguments about what they should and should not be doing to pursue the way of Jesus. What worship, dedicating one's life to the way of Jesus, pursuing God's leadership in one's life ought to look like in their life. And this is Rome that he's speaking into. So not only are they trying to decide what it looks like to follow the way of Jesus for them, but they're trying to decide that in the midst of this really pluralistic, this really diverse, this really religiously I want to say rich, like there was a lot of worship of a lot of different things going on in that space. I don't mean rich in the positive sense. There was just a lot of things to worship and a lot of expectations put on these people that made them sort of a target because they weren't willing to worship those things. Namely, the emperor himself. Rome was sort of based off of the idea of Rome and Pax Romana, were based off of this worship of the emperor as this sort of god or demigod who was leading this large-scale crusade to bring peace to the world, which was usually through conquest. But in their micro everyday lives, they would encounter temples to all sorts of gods in everyday life. So it was a really confusing space to know how to pursue the way of Jesus. And our space is pretty confusing these days, isn't it? It gets pretty confusing about how to pursue the way of Jesus when there's so many messages about what to give our lives to and how to pursue being well in our life and living the way that we ought to live. And that's what Paul is speaking into. That's what part of what you need to understand. I just want to give a plug that I had a broader conversation about the book of Romans in more of a theological, biblical studies sort of sense with one of my friends, John Dunn. And we recorded it as a podcast and put it on Facebook. If you're kind of into the Bible nerdy stuff, go for that. It's a really fun conversation that I had with him. Let's jump in to this verse that Paul is basically going to say, this is what I want to communicate to you in this book about. This is a truth that I want to speak in to the complexity of your situation, and it's a truth that is still transformative for our space as well. So let's read it. Chapter 1, verse 16 through 17. It says this, "For I," is Paul, "I am not ashamed of the gospel," this good news. And that's actually a Roman word used to proclaim good news about what the emperor has done or about to do. Paul's stealing that language, and the gospel writers steal it as well to say, hey, this is better news about what God has done. "I'm not ashamed of the gospel because it is the power of God for that brings salvation to everyone who believes." That's a great explanation of the gospel. The power of God that brings salvation to everyone who believes. First to the Jew and then to the Gentile. Those are those two communities that I was talking about that are in conflict. For the gospel, the good news, the gospel, in the gospel, the righteousness of God is revealed, made known. A righteousness that is by faith, from first to last, just as it is written, the righteous will live by faith. Now, I had a lot of fun this week. One of the things that I did, I don't post a lot on Facebook, but I posted something that we got in a conversation with a bunch of different people. Check it out on my Facebook pages. I asked the simple question, what is the honest thing that comes to your mind when you hear the word righteous? So go ahead in the comment stream right now. What's the honest thing that comes to your mind when you hear the word righteous? Now, we just read this text, so some of this might be coming to mind, but the comment stream I just found delightful, honestly. Some real honest conversation about not good things that come to mind when you hear the word righteous. But one of my favorites was from one of our community members, Katie Eichelberger, who was the first to post, it was posted multiple times, this GIF of I think that's how, is it pronounced GIF or Giphy or GIF? You tell me in the comments. This GIF of Finding Nemo, of these characters that are kind of surfer bros, they're turtles in Finding Nemo, and they say, righteous! I don't know if any of you have been in a relationship with a surfer type person who may use the word righteous. Also in that comment stream was referenced the movie Bill and Ted, which I had never seen before, just honestly. Had to look it up. It was made right about the time I was made. You can let me know if I should watch Bill or Ted or not. And that's a silly response, the first thing that came to mind. But one of the things that pointed out to me is that righteousness are not terms that are in our vernacular. That means that they're not terms that we use in everyday life, except for some of these instances of saying that was righteous or that was awesome. And that's really interesting to me because part of what I know about what it means to be human and what Paul is communicating here is that righteousness, to be made right, is something we all long for. It's a longing that's deep in every part of our way of being. We as individuals long to be made right, long to come into wholeness, long to be put back together, if you will, long to live in the way that we ought to live. Some of that is articulating us saying we want peace, we want justice in our life, we want things to be made right in our own hearts and our own spirits. And we look out into the world and our relationships, things are not right. Things are broken in our world, and we long for relationships to be made right. And we look out even more broadly in our society, and we see so much pain of things not being the way they are supposed to be. And we long for them to be the way that they ought to be. And we have a million different opinions about how to pursue those things. And part of what I want you to understand about the context of this is Paul is speaking into the same dissonance, speaking into the same confusion, speaking into the same pain. And part of what he talks about when he speaks into that pain is he's saying that the good news is God's power to save us from that brokenness. The good news is primarily about God's own righteousness, God's own capacity to make things right. This idea of righteousness will actually come up in a couple different words in Romans. When you see justification or justice and righteousness, it's all the same Greek word. We just don't have a word that's good enough to encapsulate all of the meaning that the Greek word has. And it's this echo to this Old Testament concept about righteousness that is talking in part about this covenantal relationship that the people of God have with God himself. And they're supposed to be a covenant community. And this covenant is based on the covenant with Abraham that God says to Abraham, I will bless you to be a blessing to the nations, and I will be your God. And they enter into this relationship where Abraham looks to God for leadership, and by doing so becomes a blessing to the world. So for Paul to say that the good news is about the righteousness of God, he's saying the good news is God has what it takes to fulfill that promise to Abraham, even if Abraham and his descendants and his children don't have what it takes to do that. And it says the righteousness of God, this righteousness will come to us through faith. We'll experience it through this trusting relationship with God. And you might be saying, hey, that's great. I've heard that before. Righteousness by faith or justification by faith. I get that. But what does that actually mean in my life? How does that solve the brokenness that I experience every day? And Paul makes an attempt of trying to answer that question next. The next move he makes at the end of chapter 1 is to talk about what's wrong in the world. That's why they're experiencing brokenness, why things aren't the way that they're supposed to be. And he talks about how God has this sort of anger along with you that things are not the way they're supposed to be. But then he gets to the source of why there's so much tension in the world, why things aren't the way they're supposed to be. And he talks about it's primarily about us worshiping the wrong things. It's primarily about us trusting the wrong things for righteousness. Let me explain what I mean by that. It's about trusting the wrong things to make us right. Here's what you need to understand about being human. Here's what Paul's trying to help these people understand about being human. Being human is about being someone who worships. Being someone who trusts in something outside of themselves to make them right. That's why he says in in verse 25, he said, they, speaking of all humanity in some sense, and the Roman context, all of these idol worship that they see around them, and us in ourselves who make these same mistakes, says they exchange the truth about God for a lie. They worshiped and served created things rather than the Creator, who is forever praised. Amen. Part of what Paul's trying to say, if we want to talk about righteousness, if we want to talk about things being made right, we need to understand the fundamental problem that breaks things in our life, the fundamental problem that is the source to brokenness in our life. And he almost echoes back to the beginning story, the story of Genesis, the very first moment where brokenness and sin enter the world, where the serpent, who is this representation of evil, says to Eve, he says, did God really say? Did God really say? The beginning of our brokenness is a questioning of God's goodness and authority and capacity to make things right in our world. And when we question God's capacity to make things right within us and in our world, we go looking for other sources of authority to make things right in our world. This happens all the time. We go looking for other things to make forms of brokenness in our own life right. This happens in my life all the time. I'll get super stressed about something that's happening in the world. And one of my go-to responses is to think through my financial future. Isn't that odd? Like, I'm experiencing some stress in the present, and I'll go learn a bunch about finances or something like that. Or I'll go read a book about retirement or something like that. I am 32 years old, and I'm thinking about that all the time. But this is just a demonstration of how my heart longs for something to be made right, and I go looking outside of myself to fix it. I go look to give something to myself, give myself to something to hope to be made right in return. And what Paul is saying, this is the source of all brokenness, is that we give ourselves the other things that are not God. And this is why he goes into this breaking out of all of these, often known as these lists of sin, lists of brokenness. And sadly, this part of Romans is used as this ruler stick, this like, see, you're not measuring up sort of reality. And he goes on to list like sexual brokenness, all sorts of malice, wickedness, evil, greed, depravity, this long list of brokenness in our world. And it's really hard. It's like cringe-worthy scripture, if you will. It's really hard to read through because of many ways, the ways that it's been used. But what Paul is trying to, in kind of a truth and love sort of way, is point out to us, when we give ourselves to other things in the world that are not God, ultimately what gets created is this sort of brokenness in our life. Now, here's a part of what's going on in the background in Scripture, and I think insightful to us as Christians who are often labeled as judgmental. Paul is sort of speaking in these ways, and you can almost hear in the background the Jews who are listening to this in the churches maybe where it was read for the first time, hearing these lists of sins, and they're like, yeah, that's the Gentiles, man. That's the Gentiles who worship those sort of things. Look at all this Roman culture that we're around. All these things, this is just utter depravity. This is utter brokenness around us. And then what happens next is Paul basically says, do not judge. He says, you therefore have no excuse to pass judgment on someone else. For whatever point you judge another, you be condemning yourselves, because you who pass judgment do the same thing. Another idol that we can create in our lives is this idol of knowing the right way to do things. Man, this has been the fault of Christians for centuries. We take God out of the equation and create a law for ourselves, a way to operate in the world that we make an idol, that we worship. And we judge ourselves, and we look to that way of doing Christianity as the way to save us. And we need to understand that what Paul is communicating here is that this is an adventure and missing the point. And in the same way that these other forms of worship create brokenness in our life, that detracts or creates brokenness in and of ourselves. And it gets really dark. Just hang with me here, because it's going to get better. But it gets really dark because in chapter 3, Paul goes on to say, no one's righteous. No one's experiencing being made right by giving themselves to other things. Even the law, he says, this backbone of what it meant to be a Jew, does not ultimately in itself bring righteousness. He says the only thing that it really does is point out how messed up we are. So where do we go from here? This is a really heavy moment in Romans. And I know many people who've stopped and just said, I just can't handle this. It doesn't seem like there's much hope here. And maybe you're listening to this saying that, like, JD, you're just boiling up the same frustration that I've felt over and over again. I don't know how to do this. I don't know how to move forward. I don't know how to make things right. And this is where Paul communicates the gospel again. And I want to read this in 3:21 through 27. Hold on here, because there's hope for what Paul is going to say into these communities that are fighting with each other about how to make things right, and into our world where we long to be made right and make things right in the world. This is what he says about that. He says in verse 21 of chapter 3, but now apart from the law, the righteousness of God has been made known, to which the law and the prophets testified. This righteousness is given through faith in Jesus Christ to all who believe. There is no difference between Jew and Gentile, for all have sinned and fallen short of the glory of God, and all are justified freely by grace, by his grace through the redemption that came through Christ Jesus. God presented Christ as a sacrifice of atonement through the shedding of his blood to be received by faith. He did this to demonstrate his own righteousness, because in his forbearance he had left the sins committed beforehand unpunished. He did it to demonstrate his righteousness at the present time, so as to be just and to be one who justifies, same word as righteousness, those who have faith, same word as belief, in Jesus. Well, I mean, that's a lot in there, right? And you might be listening to that and saying, what just happened? That is both what I've heard a lot from Christianity, and at the same time, I don't completely understand what's going on there. I hope I can bring a little bit of understanding here. Paul is still talking about the righteousness of God. Essentially, what Paul is saying is that any attempt we make to make things right in our life on our own ultimately ends up in us giving ourselves to other things that won't ultimately make things right in our life. He's essentially saying all of us have sinned, missed the mark, and fallen short of the glory of God, the awesomeness that God wants for our lives, and the glory that is who he is. Here's one thing, North City, that I want us to understand about what's being said in Romans here. All of us desire righteousness. All of us desire to be made right. What Paul is definitely arguing is that we cannot do that on our own. We cannot do that ourselves. We will ultimately go looking for things in our life to make us right that are not God, and those things will ultimately lead to brokenness. But here's the good news about who Jesus is, the good news about who God is. He is righteous. And what that righteousness means is that he is able to choose the right thing. He is able to choose sending his son to take on all of our mistakes, all of our brokenness, and to restore us to relationship with him. And I think when we ask what righteousness means, what it means for us to be made right, what Paul is arguing that it starts with relationship. See, the problem that Paul is trying to counteract is that righteousness is not transactional. Righteousness is relational. Let me say that again in a different way. Making things right is not transactional. Making things right is relational. Ultimately, the good news is that by being in relationship with God, it's always been the good news from the beginning. Being in right relationship with God, being in covenantal, loving relationship with God, walking through the cool of the day in the garden with God, where we have full trust in him to be the author of our lives, that we fully trust in him to show us how life ought to be in our own lives and in the world around us, brings righteousness. And history, our own personal history and the history of the world has proven that we don't have within us the ability to continually choose that sort of relationship. And when we don't choose it, we perpetuate brokenness in the world. We perpetuate sin in the world, and we make the world worse for ourselves and for everyone around us. And we don't have the capacity to fix that. And so another layer of God's righteousness is that it was right for him to come and judge the world, to say, this is broken. This is not the way it's supposed to be. And there are consequences that are happening in real time across history about from the brokenness that has been perpetuated by people worshiping things that are not God. And instead of putting all of that judgment on us, he did the right thing. Part of his righteousness looks like him suffering, him bearing the consequence on the cross in Jesus for all of that brokenness. His verdict is mercy, as we talked about last week. His verdict is to take on all of the barriers that stand between us and things being made right onto himself. And more than that, he invites us into relationship with him so that in an abiding way, and later on in Romans he'll talk about this, he gives us his Spirit so that we have guidance in everyday life to participate in a relationship with him that is the source of righteousness. To be made right is to be in right relationship with God. And we don't get that right all the time. We don't choose that all the time. But God has forgiveness and grace for us. That's why it says we are justified freely by grace. It was grace for Jesus to take the fall for us. It was grace to take on all the consequences that our brokenness and our bad choices create in our life. And it's by grace that we live. I hope that you can hear that today. I hope that you can hear that the righteousness of God is not transactional, it's relational. That you can experience being made right. You can experience righteousness by experiencing a relationship with God. And God gives that freely, doesn't hold anything against you, and invites you into a relationship with Jesus as the basis of how we make the wrong things right in the world today. So what does this mean for us? That was just like a ton of theology that we just went through there. And hello, welcome back. Come back if your brain was broken like mine has been all week. Come back here and just receive the simple truth that Paul is trying to communicate to people today and people back then. That we all have fallen short. That we all go looking for ways to make things right in our life, in our world, outside of the authority of God in our life, the authorship of God in our life. But because of God's righteousness, because God is so good, so loving, so merciful, he took the fall for that. He dealt with all the consequences of those mistakes, all the consequences of those the brokenness that we experience, the brokenness that's done towards us, and the brokenness we see in our world around us. And he invites us into his righteousness by faith. By faith, this word pisteuo, which is like trusting relationship, trusting covenantal relationship, where we trust God for the things we need in our life and the direction. We trust God to make things right in our life. So what does this mean for us? A couple different things I think it means. I've been reading through this book, Essentialism, and it's got this phrase in it that I love. It says, if you do not prioritize your life, someone else will. Another way to say that is if you don't pay attention to what you're giving worth to in your life, if you don't pay attention to what you're giving your life to in hopes that it will be made more right, that you will experience more peace, then someone else will decide for you. Some other distraction, some other temptation in the world will garner your attention and ask you to give yourself to it. Money, power, success, all of the strongest forces in our life that speak to us and say, did God really say? Why don't you give yourself to this career? Why don't you give yourself to this relationship? Why don't you give yourself to this sexual experience or sexual temptation? Because it will make you right. If we don't prioritize what we're giving ourselves to or who we're giving ourselves to, it will be given to someone else. Paul isn't inviting us to have faith. Faith, in some sense, is prioritizing who we're worshiping. Faith is prioritizing who has authority in our lives to direct where we're headed, to tell us who we are. Some of you might be listening to this and going, man, this is theologically rich. I think I understand this, but what in the world does this actually look like in my everyday life? And I've been wondering sort of the same thing and just what this means for me. And as a way of talking about that, I thought I'd just read for you a portion of my prayer this week as I've been thinking about this and just as I'm living everyday life. So this is a prayer that I just wrote out. Sometimes I write out my prayers to God. And the title is, Jesus, I'm tired. I'm emotionally and mentally tired. I don't think I have fully come to terms with the facts that surround me. Pandemic, demanding children in my home all the time, trying to live out an egalitarian work partner balance, planting as a white male in a diverse neighborhood, trying to sustain and invest in a marriage that's so meaningful to me, that's 7 years old, and a new baby on the way. It's a lot. I'm tired, but I'm here. My fatigue makes it hard for me to muster the strength to trust, to care, to be present to the demands of my life. There are things that are not right in me. I know it. Some are hard to name, too subterranean in my being to know plainly. Others are clear. God, I'm afraid. I'm prideful. I'm selfish. I'm often greedy. I wish I could say, God, that my first impulse is to always look to you and your leadership. But I go looking for relief in my pain in so many other places, in TV shows and fantasies about making more money, about endless consumption of news and information, looking for some reassurance outside of myself. Fill in the blank. I just want peace. I want a sense of wholeness and balance and calm. I think that's righteousness. I think I want that. You are righteousness. That is to say that in you and in and of yourself, you are whole, right, and good and holy. But that also is to say that those in relationship with you, by your power and your person, because of what Jesus did, we experience righteousness in relationship with you. Yeah, I don't think I've ever fully experienced that sense of peace apart from you, God. It's in you, in consciousness of your presence, in the joy of your salvation, in the company of your family, people saved by your grace, people who take you seriously but don't take themselves too seriously. It's there I feel most at home, safe, known, loved, free from my mistakes, liberated from my shame. You did that for me. You did that for us. You saw how we choose other things that perpetuate the very brokenness you are actively working to extinguish in our world. I've rebelled against your kingdom, but in Jesus, you still and always will offer me citizenship, a place in your family. I'm the prodigal son. Jesus is always paying my debts, and you are always throwing me welcome home parties. That's what this has sounded like in my relationship with God this week. North City, I hope that we can start relying on the grace of God. I hope that we can stop judging ourselves in the world and start inviting them into relationship with the one who's truly righteous, the one who's made the right choice to show us grace and mercy, and that they will be transformed by that relationship, just as we're hoping to be transformed by that relationship.
You were the word at the beginning, one with God the Lord Most High. Your hidden glory in creation, now revealed in you are Christ. What a beautiful name it is. What a beautiful name it is. Jesus, you brought heaven down. The sin was great, your love was greater. So what could separate us now? What a wonderful name it is. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ, my King. What a wonderful name it is. Nothing compares to this. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus. What a wonderful name it is. The name of Jesus. Steps could not hold you. The veil tore before you. You silenced the boast of sin and grave. The heavens are roaring, praise of your glory. For you are raised to life again. You have no rival. You have no equal. Now and forever, God, you reign. Yours is the kingdom. Yours is the glory. Yours is the name above all names. Death could not hold you. Veil tore before you. Silence the boast of sin and grave. The heavens are roaring, praise of your glory. For you are raised to life again. Death could not hold you. Veil tore before you. Silence the boast of sin and grave. Heavens are roaring, the praise of your glory. For you were raised to life again. You have no rival. You have no equal. Now and forever, God, you reign. Yours is the kingdom. Yours is the glory. Yours is the name above all You have no rival. You have no equal. Now and forever, God, you reign. Yours is the kingdom. Yours is the glory. Yours is the name above all names. What a powerful name it is. What a powerful name it is. The name of Jesus Christ.
come to the point of our service where we take communion together. We gather around the table, metaphorically or actually, and we remember who Jesus is. That's what this whole sermon and message and focus today was, is who is Jesus and what is this sacrifice that he invites us into, that he invited his disciples into on his last meal with them. He said, "This is my body, broken for you. Take and eat and remember me." And remember the way that I was broken to restore relationship with you. Remember the way that I interceded so that I can make right relationship. I can give you righteousness by laying down my life for you. And that's the type of life that he invites us into. Not a righteousness that's showing how right we are to other people, but a righteousness that lays down our lives for others as Christ modeled for us. So take and eat. And this is representing the blood of the new covenant. And covenant is God's relationship, his commitment to us. And what's so amazing is that Jesus demonstrates that loving relationship by laying down his life, by saying, "This is my blood poured out for you." Because there's a cost to the brokenness of this world. There's a cost to our sin and the way that we're separated from God. But Jesus went to great lengths to sacrifice and to love us through the pouring out of his blood, through his sacrifice on the cross, to give us that closeness in covenant relationship again. And he said, "Take and drink. This is my blood poured out for you."
The center of all history, your cross and resurrection, humiliation lifted me into it's you alone I treasure. Holy, worthy, you have no end. Holy, worthy.
North City, thank you so much for joining us this week. We invite you to receive this blessing. We end with our service with a benediction. And so we bless you into this new week. We say, God, thank you for your grace, and that grace knows no end, and that there's nothing that we can do except to believe and to have faith in the love, in the constant relationship, in the way that Christ sacrificed for us, and that all we need to do is to receive that by faith. May you be blessed with that gift this week. Thanks for joining us.